Okay. So I'm just going to do the intro bit and then. When I first met Kate several years ago, she was trying to get her son Louis back home. As a young man with complex needs, he had been sent to a residential home over 250 miles away. Each week, Kate would travel that return journey to see him, and each week she could see that he just wasn't happy. His behaviour started to become increasingly challenging, and the care staff less able to cope with him. The model of care was based on restraint with little understanding of Louis as an individual or low arousal approaches. This is a story of love, devotion, and deep knowing that things needed to change, not just for Kate and Louis, but for the care system as a whole. Kate's journey has been one of bravery and of challenging the status quo at local and national level. Her son's story was told in the Scottish Government's Coming Home report in 2018, showing how not to care. Their experiences continuing to shape that government's agenda, designed to move people detained in hospital into community settings. Kate designed and is at the heart of an intentional community where Louis now lives in his own home, supported by professional staff with wider onion rings of family and community. Kate founded a charity, the Teal Trust, that brings together people with learning disabilities, their parents, siblings, carers, and friends as a means of creating community. Kate, so lovely that you could join me today. We've known each other for a few years, and while I was thinking about the series for this podcast, I knew that you were definitely one person I wanted to talk to about brave conversations, because as we've discussed before, we know about the steps of becoming brave and challenging the status quo and everything, and it takes a lot. So we'll unpack quite a lot of that moment. So what moment made you realise that you needed to take action, sort of step off the conventional path?
So I would say there were two moments. The first was when Louis was a baby. He was 5 days old in intensive care in an incubator. He was fighting for his life. He'd been diagnosed 3 nights before, and at that point there'd been a long delay, and I had said that I was willing to bear the pain of losing him for his sake because I loved him, and I saw that he would have a long life ahead where he'd be dependent, and I knew from family circumstances that there isn't good lifelong quality care.
Mm.
And then a couple of nights later, I just sat by that incubator for 48 hours. And a couple of nights later, I saw it in a different light. I saw it in a spiritual light. In the middle of the night, I'd gone down with express breast milk and fed him with a tube. And I came back to bed and I wrestled with my soul. And I remembered what a lovely little girl I was. I was loving, I played the violin, and I used to go to Sunday school. And I remembered all those stories about stretching out to people who were vulnerable on the outside. And then I saw that I was really being invited in a really privileged way to be mother to Louis. And I don't know why I always had this profound instinct that he would be so damaged, but I did. And I thought, okay, I will take that. So that was the first one. And the second one was when Louis was in his 30s. So by then, he was diagnosed at a year with a really profound brain injury. He hasn't really progressed much beyond 2 years of development because of the profound brain injury he's got. And he had pretty good schooling all the way through. And then social care drops off a cliff when you go into adult care. And he'd been through 2 separate occasions where he'd been sent hundreds of miles from home and ended up in hospital as care of last resort. So he was in his 30s, he was back in hospital. His previous care home, which had been rough and ready, quite good, had shut. And I saw that I had to step in and take over the role of providing care for him. So whereas usually, if you're going to go to the dentist, you don't have to get all the equipment and get a dentist in. you know, you go to the door marked dentist and you go in, and by and large, I'd always thought that adult social care and childhood social care was like that. So I realized it wasn't like that any longer, and I had to do something. So that's
Mm. And that's two profound decisions that you made that sort of came from something, wasn't it? Or that sort of love and devotion, or and so what were you risking? You must have been weighing up that kind of possibility versus risk or loss of something. What was it that you were risking?
So the first time had more in a way, well, no, it had equal impact for Louis and me. The first time I knew I was risking giving up the kind of life that any of us might expect to live.
Yeah.
My grandparents had had a Down syndrome son, and I knew the profound difficulties. I also recognised that there was a profound risk of Louis not living.
Mm.
And it wasn't until years later I realised actually by Louis choosing to live, he kind of gave me a chance.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the risk the first time. And the second time, there was less risk for me, but there was huge risk for Louis because by then he was detained in hospital. He was being drugged, restrained, locked up. He was getting more and more traumatized. So for me, because I loved him and because by then I had fought a legal negligence came and therefore I had things in place. There were funds in the court and I had the powers I needed. So I could take on this thing and I could really challenge the system and say they had to work with me. I was equipped and I wanted to be instrumental in setting Louis up with a lifelong home and care.
It's incredible because there will have been others in that situation that won't have felt like they were able to have a voice. So there's something inside you that had created that momentum of just knowing. And that's not to take anything away from those who don't feel like that they have a voice. What do you think that others see or can't see or won't look at? What do you think it is that you can and also are able to articulate for others to be aware of?
Yeah, they're good questions. So first and foremost, I think the role of being a mother is really profound. I've got lots of friends who are not mothers, so it's not to, in any sense, make them different. But as a mother, I think there is something about the physical act of carrying a child where you really
Mm-hmm.
bond with the child before the child is born. Um, Not so much bonding, perhaps, but you stretch out to include that child. It becomes part of your way of seeing things.
Mm.
Really helpful that you get 9 months practice before the child
Yeah.
is born. And we know there's many, many situations where women, mothers, have made a profound difference. And I suppose that then makes me question what are the societal values that honour motherhood or don't? So
Mm-hmm.
that's quite an important thing. So as a mother, I see Louis. Um, I don't, I can't think how somebody who's a stranger sees Louis. I see him as my beloved child. I see his handsomeness. I see his smile. I know his eyes light up for me as they don't light up for lots of other people, though they do light up for great friends. So that's all in my favour. That's a help to me. I see his brain injuries from being a baby because I hold his history. We've spent
Mm.
40 years living together. So I know that I don't just meet the man of today, but I know his whole history. I see his love for me and for his sisters and his dad and his friends. And we went to Iona this year and they recognised Louis. They wrote him a letter and they said, "Thank you for coming to meet us and bringing your mum and your friends. It was lovely to get to know you. You're so loving and so kind. And it's
Oh.
wonderful when other people see Louis as I do." I see Louis positive leadership, so long as others of us point to that.
Yeah.
And because I've got that kind of Christian sense of stories behind me, I'm always mindful that there was Jesus in the middle, who's got a mum called Mary, and then he had a cousin called John, and John was the one who pointed and said, he's the one. And I think we societally have an obligation to tell others and share with others our insights that people like Louis are real leaders. And what immense lives of courage they lead.
Absolutely.
And how powerful they are, because they've taken that downward step. They don't have a mobile phone or a credit card. They have very little control over their life. Well, for any of us to live even for a day like that, we'd find it really hard. So I'm always full of admiration that Louis can manage to live that life and largely live it very cheerfully. I also see that Louis has capacity to bring out the best in others. So this morning he's been planning his week using visuals. He's got a group of carers and some wonderful people in there. And he's been baking biscuits for his Halloween party on Wednesday. So I see how he brings out love and creativity and compassion. And I see in a society that is post-Christian, we might call it, I see that people can see in the vulnerable through Louis a new imagining of that earlier story. I also see that social care is broken. When the consultant said to me in front of the incubator, society will always care, I give you my word tonight, in the same way that the NHS was dreamt up and it was far less complicated and there was far less to know, far fewer professionals to carry it out. So social care has really grown because we have an aging population, we have far more demands, we have a falling population ourselves, so there are fewer people to come forward to be carers. So I see that Louis, as a receiver of care, is just alerting us to these changes that all. And I see that Louis needs social care. So those are all things that I see from the particular to the more general, to the societal and to the political.
I know. It's just so fascinating, isn't it? Because I'll never forget being it was Jenny at PAMIS, CEO of PAMIS, saying, when you're talking about profound and multiple learning disabilities, profound is actually the profundity of us learning from these incredible human beings who have so much that we can learn from. However, we choose not to. So somebody who doesn't communicate on the same level as us, or somebody who can't physically do the same level as the next person is somehow regarded as, well, they should just be, so what if they're in a care home or they're over there? And I think I love the fact that you were saying, he's actually the one that's, he can point, or we can point to him of that absolute love and how it should be. And it must be so difficult, or must have been so difficult, thinking about traveling down on a return trip 250 miles every week and seeing him, knowing that that there's a lot of people that when it comes to challenging behavior would just go, well, he's just really naughty, without even thinking. And of course you've had that whole life with him, knowing that that was just desperate sadness and really discomfort, probably missing you and just being restrained, and it must have been absolutely heartbreaking for you to have been witnessing that. And I suppose at a time at that point not being able to push back against the system because that's the way it was.
So true. So true. And I would use the phrase trauma-informed care now,
Yeah.
because we all talk about trauma much more now. And it shows to me how important trauma-informed care is, both on a personal level. So Louis's team, every single person caring for Louis needs to understand what trauma is. and
Yeah.
need to work as a team member doing that. But I was talking on the BBC a few months ago in the context of a health and social care partnership. It's so important that the units where people live in hospital, that they practice trauma-informed care, and they
Yeah.
don't think in a kind of, how our great grannies might have thought, a bit of discipline never did any harm. It's just so ignorant now. And what you were saying about profound is so true. So three things actually. So Laura, who is one of the two patrons of our charity, her favourite song when she comes to us is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And Laura's face when we sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star totally lights up. Everybody warms themselves at Laura's smile. And another thought is, going back to Jenny and Pamis, they funded a series where people came and talked about intellectual disability. There's a man called Ian Gilchrist who wrote The Master and His Emissary, which is about the left and the right brain dichotomy. And his main thesis is that the logical brain has rather come to dominate the emotional and sensing brain, whereas people like Louis, who are not perhaps cluttered by reason, have further insights that we probably can't even guess at. But that requires us to have the humility, exactly what you were saying. We need to be curious and say, so what is it that Laura experiences or Louis experiences that we might learn?
Absolutely.
To feel ourselves part of a community where we're all equal, all equal.
Yeah. As human beings,
As
each with an.
human beings. Exactly. I'm not as good as tennis at tennis as other people are, but that doesn't matter. As human beings, we're all equal.
What do you think it was that at the point, I mean, because you now got to the point where you have been able to challenge the status quo on quite a few different levels, from being able to move Louis back up here. You've, worked with Scottish government, you're informing quite a few different things. What was the point where you said, right, right, that's it? And did you have a vision in mind at the point you made that decision, or did you? Yeah. So
Yep.
just talk me through that.
Yep. So at the point where I was saying there is another way here, and just to say that there's a famous theologian called Walter Brueggemann who said that prophecy is proposing an alternative. It's not a sort of churchy thing. It's
Yeah.
not a religious thing. It just says there's an alternative. And so I'd had a life in many ways that gave me lots of riches to draw on. I read philosophy, I studied history of art. I had been to the School for Social Entrepreneurs. I'd met Michael Young of Dartington, Lord Young of Dartington, who was one of the co-writers of the Labour Party manifesto in 1945. And I'd learnt the tools to enable me, A, and one, to speak truth to power, and B, and two, not just to speak, but to make it real.
Mm.
So I'd set up, as part of being at the School for Social Entrepreneurs, I'd set up a wee charity with a group of other parents. So I had that experience, and I'd been part of a very senior advisory committee in the Department of Health. So I was used to speaking with senior executives and politicians, policymakers. And I had pursued for 19 years a medical negligence action. So when we was a year old, we'd gone to Great Ormond Street and eventually got the truth from a wonderful neurologist called John Wilson, rest in peace, who said, I'd love to send you away saying everything's well, but it's not. I agree with you. And then a barrister friend said, actually, you may want to pursue a clinical negligence case for the future. Well, it took 19 years and we got an out of court settlement. So I had got those funds there and I had applied and become Louis' deputy to the court. And I had a vision, and I quite often found that you set off to do something and then it doesn't quite go the way you think it's going to go.
Mm.
And that resonates with some of my colleagues' experiences. So through writing a book, I met Michael Young of Dartington. He was the guy behind the Open University, Consumer Association, 1,000 charities. He was also a father. And he said to me, I think we deeply suffer for our children. And I'd say that all that I did actually was out of displacement for my pain at being powerless to help my son. So he believed in me and he helped me in that sense. But he'd talked about times where you set off and then you changed it. And I'd known about this beautiful walled garden where the nuns outside Perth had a building. And I thought, oh, I could buy that and set up a whole community there. Well, be thankful for the wishes that don't come true, because that didn't happen. But by then, I had used that as a model and was proposing that I could buy the property and I could work with a care provider and be very much involved in Louis's life. Because actually, Louis is about 2 years old, and it would be weird for a parent to step away from a 2-year-old.
Mm.
You know, 2-year-olds need that particular emotional support, with the view that I'm always trying to get to the point, there will come a point where that care has to take over from me. But I had that very clear vision, and it was absolutely grounded in a place. And it was lovely. It used to uplift my soul, and I took people to it. And I think being able to take people to a place and talk about it really clothed the vision with a reality. And then from that, also woven into that, I had done a course in ministry in the Christian church. And in my experience, I would say that the most important thing that you can see in the historic character of Jesus of Nazareth was that he lived the life. He didn't just talk the talk, he actually went and lived it. And I think that's a really important thing. So that took me all through those things. And I then shared this vision, and I knew I had to be really tactful. And goodness me, you know, I fell over backwards making connections, being a politician, being, as Michael Young had said, sort of diplomat with the people with power who were in the health services and the care services. And I brought them round to seeing that this vision was the best way forward, and there was no alternative.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And yeah, so it's just reflecting on that. It's about being able, it's either a vision, as in you can physically see something, or a feeling, and or both, that you know, you have a trusting and a knowing that that is the direction of travel that you have to go in order to make this happen. Therefore, creating allies, which is really important as well, but knowing that actually you're challenging the status quo, but you're doing it in a way where you're creating allies and showing what the way could be, because it's about an alternative, isn't it? Rather than going, what you're doing is rubbish and it's terrible and the whole system's broken. Being
Absolutely.
able to show a different way that actually was achievable, which is brilliant, and you illustrate that point. So do you think there were any status quo, I mean, assumptions about the status quo that you had to unlearn before you could challenge it? Or was it a very iterative approach that you took to it? Was it sort of step by step, or what was it? I mean, it's almost like, what for you was the status quo? It was a system that was breaking, that people didn't feel was at any point in, or couldn't change. Was that an assumption that people within the system feel, or
It was the lived experience alongside Louis over, by then, 12 years of adult social care, where there were individuals who were lovely, who'd come into caring for the right reasons, gone into nursing for the right reasons, and yet who got stuck in this mammoth system. that actually was really harming my child.
Mm.
You know, I could see him getting more and more harmed. He's a 2-year-old in a grown man's body. And as you create that harm, you're stacking up long-term problems. And even last week, Louis woke with a bad dream in the night, and he said to me, "How dare you?" Now, he wasn't saying that to me. He was putting speech quotes around that.
Hmm.
He was telling me he'd had a dream where he was being told off and he couldn't get back to sleep that night. And he quite often will have a stress response where he'll say these things. "How dare you? I said no, don't do that."
Mm.
He can't get rid of that. That's like people coming back from a war with memories they can't get rid of. So um, so this system has lost sight of the very people it first set out to help.
Hmm.
I think that's the problem. I don't think it's done intentionally, but the system is a sort of gigantic juggernaut.
Yes.
And you know, I have every sympathy for a social worker or a commissioning officer or a consultant psychiatrist or a nurse. You know, they're trying to do their best despite the system. But I think what has to happen is that we have to have a different set of approaches that's based on relationships.
And connection, isn't it? Has to be about connection rather than bureaucracy and spreadsheets.
Yeah,
I mean, spreadsheets work obviously because you have to make sure it balances. But
that's right.
one of my bugbears over the last few years, as you've watched everything decline, is the fact that the people that are making the decisions are those who are looking at the spreadsheets, and then it's not taking into account because they don't have a connection with those elsewhere. So the priorities, I feel, are sometimes missed when it comes to humans who are all involved in this. So
And because I read philosophy, which included logic, I see the logical inconsistencies because there's a logic of decisions that are taken about what you're going to have for breakfast.
yeah,
And then there's a logic taken about decisions about who's going to look after you and what care qualities do they need and what training. And then there's another one about how do we divvy up resources fairly and equitably. Now, all of those have got their own different logics.
yeah,
And so all of those need to be taken into account.
absolutely. And it's between short term and long term vision, and also the difference between cutting something because it may a service or access to something because it balances the books at the end of this year, as opposed to what effect is this going to have over the next 10 years if you start doing things now. Um, so you must have had moments of doubt in times like this, because I can imagine, I mean, you're talking a lot of years. So what practice or principle keeps you going in these sort of moments of doubt?
At the most, yeah, I mean, there have been many moments. There's a great poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, "Not, I'll not carry and comfort despair, not feast on thee." You know, it's so easy to despair. Um, and I used to drive up and down that road to Hartlepool. You know, my heart just absolutely aching, coming backwards and forwards from Dundee, you know, really despairing. But at the most profound level, I suppose my faith is there, and
Mhm.
I just trust. It sounds weird, and to people who don't share that faith, lots of people in my family don't, but at a most profound level, I just trust that all shall be well. And then it's about learning to see. And so it might be somebody at the bus stop who says, "Nice day today." And you think, "Bless you, thank you, I feel better now." You know, it's all those, that's what I think is really important. And I would say that joy, you know, noticing those moments of joy, the light this morning on the trees was absolutely glorious. And My family love me. My friends love me. The older I get, the more I look back and I think, why didn't I see how much love and support there was all around me? You know, I think that takes practice.
Mm.
I see that I don't even mean this in a religious way, but I think, and people will talk about mindfulness, and a Buddhist friend would talk about this, the way where you practice your habits of being thankful and of noticing and of being in relationship. And I hope that then speaks to anybody who's felt a bit put off by me speaking in what happens to be Christianity, because that was how I was raised. But I think these deep spiritual realities, which also goes then with remorse and sometimes shame, and sort of, oh, I could have done that better. I think all those things are really there. And I think I have a belief in myself that's come from people who've believed in me, like Michael Young. I think I'd say that persistence is my middle name. I would say my mother, who died 3 years ago, and she gave such a wonderful model about being committed in loving. Um, um, and I would say the apple tree, which is, you know, I'm thankful about it. Apple tree is Louis's home, and it's become a home for me amongst people who are like-minded, who share my caring role. And it isn't easy being a family of somebody like Louis. And it's particularly not easy for siblings or steps. So my husband is Louis' stepfather. Not easy for them. And I'm just so grateful to them for all they do. And you can hear, you know, I like words. I'm a reader. I love going to the live broadcasts of opera. Those things give me joy, and the natural world. And I'm married to an artist of the natural world. All of those things bring me joy. And you know, get up, go to bed, feel sorry for the things you feel sorry about, and get up fresh in the morning and start again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so very wise words, and I agree. I mean, I think there's a universal spirituality that you can connect to, and that could be through Christianity, Buddhism, whatever. And I think it's, but the fundaments are that trust and that knowing. So you may be on a very hard path, but actually, if you've got, it's connecting all those things together. It's having that feeling and that intuition with what you know you want to see in the future, and then being able to, those little tiny things every day of being able to go, okay, just so once you've got that, you can start spotting the opportunities. Whereas I think if you sort of give up and shut down and don't believe that you're going anywhere, it's very difficult to see an opportunity when it rises, no matter how tiny that opportunity is. There's a sort of balancing the scales between possibility and loss and fear, and being able to just take that step forward. So it's really lovely to hear you talking like that. You may have answered this already, but you know, what if you were to distill it? What drives everything you do?
Well, I'm going to come back to some of those spiritual words. I'd say love and thankfulness and commitment, search for justice. It's very easy. I'm always a little bit aware that I'm talking about Louis and the apple tree community. Well, they're the ones who, if you like, have initiated all this for me. But I want that for other people's children. Um, there are 168 people in Scotland locked up in hospital. There are 2,000 people in England. There are tens of thousands in Europe. I believe in a greater justice. And when I see massive motorcades and try to guess at what they cost, that is money that could be spent on social care.
Yeah.
So I think that this sort of awareness of the value of human beings, the value of human love and human community. So I suppose in that sense, that's a communitarian way of viewing the world. I think that politics today is in a real mess. You know, the party politics are all over the place. They don't seem to be rooted in deep values. I think we need to come back to notions of kinship and community. I'd say that here in Scotland, we've got a better grounding, because Scotland, in a funny way, had more of a sense of community through the clan system. And it's a smaller it's a smaller unit. You know, 5-6 million people is different from 60 million people in England. There's a greater sense of relationships. And I think people will quite often say to me, Kate, you know, you know so many people. Well, a bit like you're saying, you know, I spent a lot of time on the tide line, going along, and you're always looking for another pebble that's shiny and exciting. And I just seem to have been blessed by meeting people and being fascinated by people and enjoying people. So I do have a lot of connections, for which I'm really grateful. And I think that relationships can be a way of going forward. And I suppose I'd like to say something, and I might say something a bit later about how sometimes that works. And I say that's really important in Apple Tree, but in the bigger political scene and what I hope for, I think perhaps we need to tease out a bit more.
Yeah, just reflecting on what you said there as well. I think curiosity is such an important thing, isn't it? Because the minute we take everything for granted, you're just kind of coasting. And so that curiosity and ability to connect with others because you're genuinely interested in who they are, and I think it's such an amazing facet. So we've sort of talked quite a lot about what's driven you and about you know, the really difficult times that you've had. What do you want someone listening to this to do differently tomorrow?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a wonderful opportunity. And thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about this. I'm really grateful to you. I spoke before about how there are different logical, well, in logic, you call them sets, logical groups of ways in which we can be different. So I think that there's the human relationship sense where we can try to be kind and we can try to understand each other's points of view. We can pause before we respond, and we can be a bit thoughtful about how we respond and a bit tactful and try to do it in such a way as other people can hear us, because there's no point just blah 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 if it's not going to be heard. And I know that I'm not really as good at that as I'd like to be. And I meet people, I think, oh, you're so skilled, where you just sort of say, I wonder, and then you give a kind of example. So at human levels, I think I'd like to see things happen differently. I see within the system of care, which is a level I'd say below politics, although it is practical politics, see that we need to be honouring care. We need to be honouring people who come into care. We need to equip them. If somebody doesn't know that the jar of coffee is in that cupboard, you can't be angry at them. You'd just be saying, oh, the jar of coffee is in that cupboard. And then mentioning to the folk who have the senior roles, it's probably quite a good idea for everybody who comes to work here to have a really good walk through the house to know where the coffee's kept. You know, I'm using that example.
Yeah.
You know, Louis very complex. And overall, I'm really thankful that Louis lives his life day by day, many days really well. And I think that any times when people aren't coming alongside him and understanding him, and not because there's any will on their part, but they simply haven't been equipped. So I think that the training of people in care is really important, and understanding them and trying to do our best for them. And we know that there are massive budget constraints in care. But on the other hand, there's already huge amounts of money being spent. So we want to know that that money is being spent well. And then I think that does bring in a sort of an accountability level. If I'm willing to go to Louis 3 days a week and be alongside him for several hours at a time, which in one way is a joy because he's my son, but it's also caring. It's a massive responsibility. I can't go away on a holiday of a week. And I think if people are going to work, I think there needs to be an expectation of mucking in and working as a team. So I want those things to happen. And I want professionals to be curious. I want professionals to be curious about the people who are cared for, and I want them to be curious about the gap between the team and what's actually going on. And I want them to step up. And I really want them to explain trauma-informed care and storytelling and how to be fun and how to be creative and see the potential for joy. I want that all to happen. And I want professionals to be curious about what they can learn from us parents, because even now I encounter some professionals who don't want to work with parents. Actually, pretty much all the professionals I meet do want to work with me, and really, we're all equals. But I know it's not the case everywhere. And that's true of politicians and policymakers and executives. And I want the public. I don't want the public. I went into a public space the other day, and I didn't meet a very warm with Louis, and I didn't meet a very warm response. And I went back a few days later and I explained, and I said, I just thought you might like to know. I didn't go in there and quote Equalities Act. That wouldn't get me anywhere. But I just thought, you might like to know. And then I went back again yesterday, and the man said, oh, hello, chappie, how are you? And by and large, if we praise people, then we get on well together.
Yeah, that's such a lovely approach. So what's next for you and Louis then?
Right. Well, broadly, in its widest, I want to see the end of what I would say is systemic disablism. We talk about systemic racism, and that's just a long view ahead, and it's a long view ahead around disablism, and that's why I love the Gospels, because Jesus meets the man who was born blind, and everybody said, "Oh, what did his parents do? They must have done something really bad." And there's a man who says, "Help, help." And his disciples are saying, "Oh, don't talk to him. He's an outsider." Well, so we're never going to get rid of these things, but we just go on trying, because by going on trying, it's the same with environmental issues. But it's what I just think it should be put up there as one of the broad things that we need to deal with. I think that the social teaching of human rights and all our modern views of human rights and Equalities Act needs to be seen and come together much more with all those faith groups, because every faith has got different perspectives on this, which means that the vulnerable are seen as the most precious. So I'd like to see all those things. I'd like to see much more coverage. So thank you for this opportunity, because I'd like to see more things on the telly. I'd like to see documentaries and dramas about people with disabilities. There was that lovely series, There She Goes, written by two parents of a young woman with profound disabilities. And it was lovely. You know, they managed it really well. And I heard her talking at a conference about how they needed to keep a balance between the challenges and the upbeat thing. We've got Lucy Adams in the BBC Scotland, Home Affairs correspondent. She gives great platforms, but I've also noticed that professionals hate it when parents go to the newspapers or to the BBC and they feel they're being got at. So I think that's something where professionals need to see that this is a way that can be for everybody to help move. My charity, the H.L. Trust, has commissioned a film. So that's going to be about Louis and his life. So that'll be one tiny answer towards it. And I see that it's a whole lot of tiny answers. There's no magic wand. If there were, it would have been used a long time ago. But small, you know, kind of collaborative ways where we can see that we're doing things together. Here's another one. Both my kids did Duke of Edinburgh Awards. I mean, that was an amazing scheme that came out of left field. I'd really like to see King Charles or Prince William come up with some radical new idea that puts Louis and Laura and Jamie and Fraser and all our friends, people who've been detained in hospital, puts them central and says, we admire you. We admire your family. We admire your carers. Right, challenge for you guys. I'd like at a state level to see radical rethinking about care. And I would go back to my old mentor, Michael Young, who saw kinship and the relationships of women in the East End as a really strong way of collectively releasing social energy. Because that's what's happened with Apple Tree. My involvement, you know, it's not the big me, but it's kind of the vision has enabled the release of lots of social energies for people to come to our parties. Every Monday, we do a lovely Zoom, and it is a prayer group, and that might put some people off. But I send out a weekly newsletter, which is in translation. So it's about saying, here we are, that's what we're doing this week. And it lets people know. And I'd really like to extend that to a broader group of people. And I just see that I think there's a really important collaborative political thing that can be done, which is to gather the good news stories. And, you know, that's always particularly funny in a Christian sense, because gospel means good news. So, you know, actually gathering the good news stories that draws together. I know lots of parents who've got different ways of solving the underlying problem of lifelong care. But, you know, why don't we get all those things together and share them instead of them all being diffused and people going back to the beginning and reinventing the wheel? And I suppose all of that's really important because I'm 66 and Louis worries. Louis, with his profound wisdom and insight, particularly after my mother died, he said, Mum's going to die. So he had the insight, and we can never know. We have to live like him with not knowing. So I don't know quite how he understands that. But practically, I have to ensure that the care that follows after me is there for him. And I think, like Louis, he understands things and he can't tell us. We have to have the humility to understand the things we don't understand. I'm not very good at answering in a concise way.
That's okay, because I think it's all brilliant, because obviously this is an ongoing thing, and it's not going away, because there's a systemic issue right down to obviously your personal and familial issue, and you're thinking already, obviously you've got to put things into place, and it feels like part of that drive is how can you create a system where when you're no longer here, you know that Louis okay, and that again is part of that. But there are so many different things. But I also love the fact that you're saying it's like you've got little answers to things, but there's also that collaborative thing. So, you know, hopefully people might listen or know somebody in a similar situation who will be inspired or sparked by some of the things you said and went, right, I want to get in touch with Kate now because actually I've got an idea. Or, you know, so I completely agree. Talking about things is sort of very intentional, and will put things out there and hopefully create even more. So it's been so lovely to talk to you, Kate. I've really enjoyed it. And in terms of brave conversations about being brave, about being thrust into a situation and then choosing to be brave, is, you know, in different parts of your life, I think have been amazing. And also the that central part of Louis and that intuition he has, and that deep connection, and that you get to see on a and feel on a daily basis is amazing. And being able to hear that from you, I think is just lovely as well. So I wish you both luck, and I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. You take care.
I'd invite anybody, if you want to get in touch, email me, pick up the phone, the HL Trust. We have a website, contact me through that, because together we can. That's, you know, that was Barack Obama's book, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Together we can. And I'm just so grateful to everybody who's travelled with us. And thank you, Kirsty, for being one of them.
Oh, thank you. Okay. All right. Bye bye.
Bye.